Welcome to Righting Wrongs here at Hudgell Solicitors, the easy guide to the legal issues many people may have to deal with in their lives. I'm Keith Phillips, and joining me to discuss informed consent in pregnancy and childbirth is Solicitor Maria Repanos, Head of Medical Negligence here in our Manchester office. Welcome back, Maria.
Thank you, Keith.
Now, Maria, first of all, let's understand what informed consent is in a medical setting.
Okay, so consent to treatment means that an individual has to give permission to receive medical treatment or to undergo any test or examination. So for that consent to be informed, they need to understand the risks of benefits of that treatment or those tests. It needs to be explained to them in a way that they can understand. They need to be advised of alternatives. That doesn't mean that they have to be told about every single risk or that they have to know absolutely everything about that procedure or examination. And if there is a failure to give informed consent and an injury then arises afterwards, that can mean that there is a potential clinical negligence claims, but as we know, these are very difficult cases.
Well, Maria, what issues can a lack of informed consent lead to in childbirth and pregnancy?
They can ultimately lead to injuries being sustained by the mother in some cases, and they can lead, for example, to say episiotomies, which may or may not have been wanted by the mother. We've represented a number of women in cases in connection with informed consent relating to childbirth and where there have been issues to do with the management and delivery of labour. And it's really important. You know, childbirth is a really exciting time, but it's also an incredibly stressful time for expectant mothers. So it's absolutely imperative that they're always fully informed of the treatment that they're going to receive. And in terms of obtaining their consent for treatment, you know, the treatment that women undergo during childbirth is often extremely invasive. And it's really important that their wishes are respected, as the consequences can be quite life-changing in certain situations.
Would informed consent be required, for example, to perform a caesarean?
That's absolutely right. So if a caesarean section is performed, you would expect a clinician to obtain consent. There may be situations where it isn't always possible to obtain informed consent. So that might be in a situation where it's a life and death situation, or where, for example, a woman is unconscious. You would, in those scenarios, take into account any wishes that were expressed as part of any birth plan. But there may be some situations where a clinician would make that decision where an individual just doesn't have capacity to do so at the time, which would happen in an emergency situation. And in those situations, that would generally be deemed to be acceptable.
And would you have informed consent also for, say, an induced labour?
You would expect to obtain informed consent from a woman if you're going to induce labour. Absolutely. And we've dealt with many informed consent cases, and it's just really important that birth options are discussed in full and that women understand the risks and benefits of all of their options, which are relevant to their own often unique situation. And there's a landmark case from 2015 called the Montgomery case, which sets out informed consent in that type of scenario. So in that case, the lady was pregnant and she suffered from diabetes, and she was quite small, and she wasn't warned that there were additional risks and complications associated with a vaginal birth. And sadly, her son then suffered a number of injuries as a result of the vaginal birth. And the case that she made was that had she been informed of the increased risks to her baby, she would have requested a caesarean section. In that case, what was important was the explanation of material risks and what a material risk is, and the importance of a material risk is the significance that an individual places on that particular risk. And so the ruling in that case supported an argument that it's a doctor's role to enable a patient or a woman in that scenario to give them all of the information they need to make a fully balanced decision.
Can you give other examples of where you and your team have successfully represented clients in childbirth where there hasn't been informed consent?
Yeah, we've represented a number of women in cases relating to informed consent. So some examples are where women haven't been consulted fully in relation to delivery plans, or where they haven't been informed of the potential risks or benefits of a particular treatment that they might not have undergone had they fully appreciated the impact of potential complications arising out of a procedure. Also, we've acted and continue to act for women where there are issues that have been dealt with, where there are issues that have been picked up on scans in the antenatal period, and because they haven't been fully advised of the impact of those injuries, they've then gone on to have children afterwards where they would have potentially terminated the pregnancy. So those are wrongful birth cases, and we've acted for a number of clients in those types of scenarios.
When it comes to pregnancy and childbirth, what is good practice then when it comes to informed consent?
I think just being very, very clear with the patient, explaining the risks to them in a way that they understand, and trying to understand from the patient what risks would be important to them. So like in the Montgomery case, so understanding what significance an individual would place on a particular risk. And also real care has to be given to patients where English isn't their first language, so an interpreter needs to be provided. And I think clinicians need to just listen and understand patients and their families and answer questions that they might have about a particular procedure or investigation that's being carried out. They also shouldn't rush patients to make a decision so that they can feel confident that the decision is right for them.
Well, if someone is listening and they feel that we're not listened to during pregnancy or childbirth, and there were failings by medical professionals in the area of informed consent, in what circumstances should they take legal advice?
I think where there's an injury that's been caused as a result of an issue relating to informed consent, then I would strongly advise any individual to seek specialist advice in that scenario and to do it at the earliest opportunity. The cases involving informed consent are quite complex, and often because we have to take witness statements from clients relating to conversations that they've had with clinicians, and sometimes those conversations are not fully documented in the medical records, and we sometimes only have, a mother's version of events. It's really important that we see people see clients as quickly as possible, whilst sort of those memories are still sort of fresh in their, whilst things remain fresh in their thoughts, essentially.
Now, often in such cases where you've represented women, compensation isn't the motivating factor in many cases. They want explanations. They feel let down.
I think that's absolutely right. Compensation often plays a part, but I think where individuals have been let down, they want someone or an organisation to be held to account in terms of what we do. And certainly with every client I see from my first meeting, I seek to understand what they want to get out of the legal process and why, and I work in accordance with their wishes. And it's very common for women in those types of scenarios to be very clear that they don't want what's happened to them to happen to anyone else. And so things like the improvement of patient safety and education and training being carried out is very important there.
Now, you say cases involving informed consent can be complex, so presumably you really need to seek out specialist legal advice.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I would always approach a firm who has significant experience in dealing with those types of claims. And certainly at Hudgell's, we have a team of solicitors who are very well equipped to deal with those issues and have significant experience in dealing with informed consent cases.
Maria, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Medical negligence solicitor Maria Repanos, who specialises in birth injury and birth trauma claims here at Hudgell Solicitors. Thank you for listening to Righting Wrongs, and if you need further information regarding any medical negligence issue, head to our website hudgellsolicitors.co.uk.